He posted for a ranch cook at noon. A single widow with children answered the notice. High sun over Valina Wells, New Mexico territory. Dust bright as chalk. The street wide open, the porch boards warm under a palm nail, heads glinting as Gideon Vale hammers a clean square of paper to the mercantile wall. Cook wanted room and board wages. Fair apply at Vale spread north of the wash. The last tap rings like a bell and the clerk grins, but the bunkhouse already complains at noon. Stew again. Boys say the hands, so the notice goes up and Gideon steps back. Boots planted, hat brim, low leather vest, creaking over denim shirt, closed holster. Unmoving neckerchief, a slash of worn red. The page flutters once in the breeze, then stills, and the hook sinks in because a stage bench scrapes and a canvas-topped coach sighs to a stop, and a woman climbs down with 3 small shadows tight to her skirt. She walks straight through the heat as if the road itself meant to test her resolve. Slate blue cotton dress cinched by a narrow belt braid run down the spine, boots scuffed child on the left clutches a small rag horse. The middle one squints up the smallest tucks behind their mother, and the stranger sets a cast-iron skillet on the porch rail like a seal of oath. Then looks at the paper, then at Gideon, and says nothing at first. Just breathes slow, steady, like someone counting the last coins in a pocket. The event is plain enough for any eye. The skillet gleams in noon light, black and sure, with a shallow nick near the handle, the promise of heat and work. Bread within it, and the widow keeps one palm on the rim, while the other gathers the trio into a neat line. Names come quiet. Mara Elling, the eldest. Elsie, the boy Hugh, the little one. May, hunger in their cheeks, not begging hunger, working hunger. Gideon studies the set of her shoulders, the travel grit on the hem. No plea in the gaze, only offer the sign you posted says, cook wanted. I answer at noon. Like it says, my late. Ethan rests under cottonwoods near Silver. Run we go forward from there if you allow it. The street holds its breath. A pair of drovers pause mid-stride. One laughs softly, then stops when Gideon turns. Trial only tonight. Kitchen behind the longhouse fire kept proper hands fed without argument. Stay a week if the men eat in peace. The words land flat as nails. Mara nods. Once takes back the skillet, lifts it as if it weighs nothing and heads toward the north gate. The children march in formation. Small boots, tapping the cadence of purpose. Dust lifts around their calves like pale smoke water. The yard opens to corrals, to a rack of harness shining with oil, to a wind pump chattering above a drinking trough, to a cookhouse of boards and stubborn nails. The iron stove sits ash-gray but serviceable beside a tin coffee pot dented at the spout shelves bare, except for a crock of salt, a sack of coarse flour, a wedge of lard, a jar of dried chiltepin pepper, and a canvas bag of old beans left by some long-gone hand. Gideon points to it all, one small sweep of the wrist, then falls silent to watch, not to help, because a test must be clean. Work begins without fuss. No prayer to the stove, no complaint about the stockpot. Mara wipes the stovetop with a damp flour sack, feeds split juniper into the belly. Waits for the drawer, sets the skillet onto iron as breath returns to the flue. She lifts water from the barrel and pours until the rasp of old beans softens and the simmer starts steadied by a sprinkle of salt crushed peppers, a twist of grease scraped from lard. She kneads quick circles of dough with buttermilk pinched from yesterday's churn throws in a handful of sage from a small pouch tucked at her girdle, as if it had waited there for months, for exactly this flame. Her hands move like a seamstress counting stitches, whisk, pat, fold. Pat the children sort kindling by length, the boy stacks sticks. The eldest girl wipes the work table with a rag wrung tight. The smallest carries spoons from crate to shelf lips. A little hymn under breath. Not church loud, just child quiet. The bunkhouse sends scouts' noses before boots. A lank wrangler named Column hangs by the jamb ready to sneer, but the air changes on him. Hot bread on iron skillet, a scent of browning flour and tallow, and one whisper of sage, the smell of steadiness. The smell of there will be seconds if you earn them under the hitch rail. Gideon stands half in sun, half in shade, eyes fixed on the ritual. The leather of his vest softens as his ribs loosen a fraction. Nothing in the yard shouts yet. A sense of order grows. Fence staples sorted on a crate rope, coiled right side out. Not dumped a water dipper set by the barrel rim instead of lost in it. Mara speaks little, only what directs the flow. Hugh carry the splints. Elsie mind the fire door may. Stay where shadow keeps you cool. Each word weighs exactly enough, not more soon. The beans darken, the biscuits split, move to the stovetop in the skillet again. Straw-colored bottoms up, turned with a knife so old its handle shines smooth as river rock. A small pot of coffee joins the heat strong enough to stand a spoon. Last Gideon notes the most stubborn detail. Mara sets a pan of water to steam on the far plate, to soften the air in the room so lungs stop scratching. A ranch built on breath knows the gift when it arrives. Bell clang from the yard calls to table benches scrape along plank floor. The hands file into the mess with faces arranged for complaint. They find tin plates warm, not cold knives wiped dry, not gummy a bowl of beans that carry body a line of biscuits brushed with tallow crisp at the brim, little pinches of chopped chili tucked in for warmth, mugs of coffee deep as a canyon column chews. Swallows looks at Gideon with a frown that means surprise, then goes back for a second spoon. Not one word of praise given, but the half-smile betrays him. Bigger men eat fast in silence, smaller ones mimic them. The room settles quiet enough for the papers in Gideon's desk to stop rattling in his mind. Nobody laughs at anyone tonight. Even the card boys leave decks stacked and clean. The children have their own bowls near the stove, kept safe on a crate turned sidewise. Mara eats last, standing with her back to the window like a guard at her post, eyes on her trio hands, steady on the ladle. A calm captain riding out a long day of wind. Sun drops westward yellow through the porch slats. The first shift drifts back to pens, the second to the tack room. Gideon remains by the doorframe, a fixed point in a moving scene, leather creak when arms fold but nothing else stirs. Then trouble rolls lazy from the wagon yard. A feed cart left on a slight grade had loosened its chock. A lopsided barrel of oats shifts inside wood rims. Complain the whole thing starts to move. Not fast, but sure-headed across packed earth toward the back step, where May plays with 2 spoons tapping a tune. Mara sees it without flinch. No scream, no dance of panic. She snatches a wet cloth from the wash basin, slings it low under the wheel like a slingstone of fabric. The rim catches, the damp rag slips, loses bite, slows. She plants one boot against the spoke shoulder set, coaxing the tracks to cut shallow instead of deep. The cart angles away, bumps to a halt against a low post. Dry dust skirts. Her hemme blinks at the change and goes back to her spoon percussion, as if nothing had happened. Gideon has already reached for rope, then stops because the solution stands finished before he gets there. His gaze rests on the small wet cloth now full of wheel grime. The simplest tool used at the right breath. Evening cool finds the porch boards shading over to bronze mule deer call from the drawer lamps get trimmed in the bunkhouse glass. Chimneys polished with newspaper so smoke stains thin. Gideon steps into the cookhouse. Finally the threshold creaks. He sets a clean tin cup on the table. A not quite invitation, a not quite thank you. Mara wipes the skillet with salt and a folded rag by habit. No scrape left on the iron, no grit kept for tomorrow. She does not explain the old tricks. The cast iron speaks for her. She points with her chin at a narrow pallet near the back wall. We can sleep there for now. I will scrub in the morning before the first coffee boil. Her voice holds no tremor, only a gate latch, sound true and practical. The eldest girl lifts a rolled canvas and ties it at one end to make a sling for the smallest. The boy counts kindling again, then lines boots toe to toe near the wall. Each act ticks like a tiny clock, moving the room toward order. Gideon kneels near the stove without quite admitting the kneel. He studies an iron trivet with a hairline split, remembers a farrier who could braze such a thing if supplied with patience and coin. Speaks at last, barely above the hum of the day. Take the weak Mara Elling wages after the first drive when the herd clears the north pasture. You feed them. I handle the noise outside the door. That is the bargain. She nods, accepts without smile or relief, because work done today defines tomorrow more than any pledge. Then she reaches into a small canvas pouch sewed into the dress lining, draws out a folded parchment wired with a wax pellet. Not a letter, a list, her own hand. Careful script recipes, you might call them, but mostly counts flour per head, ashes raked by the hour water, Carried by the quart, she sets that on the shelf beside the coffee, so anyone who stirs a pot can follow the same road. Whether or not she stands in the door, Gideon tracks the marks on the page, the habit of a mind that plans for absence and return. His chest rises once in a heavy breath. Not grief, not joy, a clearing. The bunkhouse laughter edges back in low and human through the wall. Night does not own the place because lamps glow clean and the wind rocks the pump with an even click, so the yard rests easy. A meadowlark argues with crickets, then gives up the argument. Gideon pauses outside the threshold again, sees 3 small shapes asleep in a neat row, their mother curled near the stove like another log placed for warmth. The iron holds soft heat. The room smells of coffee, chicory sage, a whisper of soap, lye and clean wood. The rancher sets his hat on his knee for a second, touches the brim to skull as if to ground himself, then replaces it and returns to the yard. The fence line will need riding before dawn. Coyotes tested the lower run 2 nights ago, but the thought seems manageable for the first time in months because the kitchen no longer wobbles under its own emptiness. When morning rides in bare and bright, the yard goes gold as wheat. Gideon boots crunch through frost patches in the shade of the eastern wall, while smoke slips thin from the cookhouse pipe. Biscuits appear again, but smaller, a working man-size boiled coffee poured without apology, a skillet full of eggs cracked into lard, smells like muscle fuel. Not comfort the hands. Eat clean without pushing elbows or jabbing jokes, and the boy Hugh fights a smile when the largest rider slides his plate over for another egg. Gideon takes this in like a surveyor mapping water. He says very little yet. A pulse at his throat gives away some deep release. This machine might run true if guarded. After breakfast chores, the rancher walks the perimeter, finds a corner of earth by the pens that always refuses grass, spare feed, trampled into dust over seasons. He stops dead because 3 short rows cut straight the length of a boot have appeared sometime between dusk and dawn. The soil turned soft with a spade. Someone watered at first light because a damp dark lies under the crumble. Not weeds hidden, but intention by a hand that knows how to claim small ground against big emptiness. He glances toward the cookhouse door where a tin dipper now hangs on a nail, instead of lost in the barrel where a broom leans. Bristles up, not down, where 3 pairs of kid boots rest side by side. The new rows carry seed not visible yet, but by noon, a thin thread of green shivers in the breeze. The kind of promise that does not ask for faith, only for guard duty. He stands over it long enough for a shadow to move an inch, then heads for the north pasture, with his mind changed, not in words, but in balance. The turn arrives in the open, rather than in a room near mid-afternoon. A company man from the rail spur rides up, coat too neat, jaw too smooth. Paper folded in a leather folder offers supply on credit with terms that bite. Later he glances past Gideon toward the cookhouse at the woman at the table and says, "The spread could use stability. We can place one of our own to keep books and provisions in order," meaning displace the woman who just found the beat of the stove. Gideon holds the horse's rein near the bit, looks at the stranger long enough for the man to taste dust, then replies in a voice as flat as the basin. The kitchen keeps its own order. "Now tell your buyer the herd will be tallied on schedule, payment in coin, not in chain." As the rider turns away disgusted, the smallest child appears in the doorway with a dipper. The widow takes it, kneels to drink in a strip of light, smile almost invisible, but there a pact passes. Not romance, not yet a flint spark falling into true tinder. The rancher watches one breath longer, then goes back to saddle because cattle do not pause for revelations. As twilight leans toward the barns, the first trouble with real teeth bites from the far draw. A dry thunder of hooves splits the ground. A pen gate has swung wide. A hinge pin rattled loose earlier than anyone guessed. A string of yearlings bolts toward the wash. Not a full stampede, not death, simply loss waiting to happen. If unturned, Gideon snaps to the nearest gelding vaults to the saddle leather slaps echo off wood rails. A call whistles high to the 2 best hands nearby. They angle to flank the drift dust coughs up in sheets. A dozen animals trot where they please, until a figure steps into their line of sight by the wash. The widow with her children behind the fence at safe remove lifts a strip of bright canvas like a signal flag. Not flapping wild, just steady enough to shift the lead steer's gaze. Ears twitch, heads tilt. The line bends curious rather than crazed. Gideon and the riders ease around from the side, sweep the run back toward the pen at a lope smooth as water. The gate swings and bites shut this time with a new nail tapped home by the boy Hugh under direction from his mother, who carries a hammer, like she has carried tools before the crisis fades in the same breath. It arrived leaving only worked lungs and a new respect in the eyes of the men who saw a kitchen mind handle a pasture flare. Without shouting, night rises, but the last image of the day holds bright. The cookhouse window warm, the yard orderly ropes hung straight, a single star over the pump. The ranch seems to breathe as one creature, and the turning point lies quiet but firm within it, because after the meal, Gideon places his ledger on the table, not in his desk, and says lightly but with final weight, "Mara Elling, write in the flour and bean count each evening, so I see it at dawn. We keep this partnership clean." She nods, then reaches for the pencil, the same one that never quite fit his grip, and the mark of graphite on paper sounds like a new brand, burning through old hide. The future does not grin yet it stands within reach of work, steady as an anvil on a wooden block. Morning comes white and clean over Valina Wells. The pump ticks. Even the ledger lies open on the cookhouse table with a stub of graphite set crosswise like a promise. Gideon rides fence at first light, finds new hoof scuff near the north gate, marks it with a boot heel, and returns to the yard where flour dust hangs as soft as breath above the stove. Mara's braid falls straight between shoulder blades, slate blue cotton tied with a narrow strip of canvas. The skillet shines black as rainrock biscuits lift at the rim. Beans give a low bubble. The children sort wood by length and lay it like rails along the wall. Order grows without speech. Tin cups rest upright on a shelf, instead of upside down in a washpan. By noon, a wagon from town rattles in with salt sacks and a roll of stovepipe. The driver eyes the tidy room and grins. "You keep this place like a chapel." Miss Ellen, the widow, wipes one palm on her apron. "Not a chapel. Just a kitchen meant to keep men breathing a long time." The driver's gaze goes to 3 thin rows near the pen's tender green, the height of a finger. Gideon had seen them first at dawn. Now they sit in sun, like a lined song mint, down one side, fever, few down the next, a third row seeded with something he cannot name, broad-veined leaves that look like they came off a mountain. The rancher crouches, fingers the soil, feels it cool below the crust because someone brought water here before sunup. Not a miracle, just labor counted, right? He straightens as Mara rounds the tax shed basket at the hip. No flinch on sight, seeing him, only that raised brow. "You worry about room?" she asks. "They do not take much space." He nods, says nothing because the strip of ground tells enough. Days slip forward with a steadiness a ranch seldom grants. The bunkhouse quiets between meals. Boots stop stomping through the doorway. A dipper hangs on a nail. The boy Hugh learns to shape biscuits as quick discs while Elsie checks fire doors. May sorts spoons. A hand-named column starts slicing bacon thin instead of tearing it by fist. The place begins to sound like work done right, not punishment. A cough that rode Gideon all winter fades from bark to faint rasp. He does nothing grand about it, only rides farther. Each day, checks the lower drawer, repairs a slat on the south windbreak, yet the weight inside his ribs moves off a notch. One afternoon, a new boy from town dries up pale at the trough, fools with a leaf. He should not chew, sinks to the dust, while older men shout for a physician. 2 hours away, Mara drops to a knee, places 3 fingers at the throat, reads breath like a book, then sends Elsie for the kettle, Hugh for the pouch of yellow root may for a cup. Within minutes, steam pulls scent through the doorway. Mint a string of bark, a dry bitter someone would spit if they did not know better. Drops touch the tongue. The boy's stomach curls, then settles the pulse. Evens hat brims lower in respect. Word runs across the pasture quicker than a stray yearling. The cook saved a hand. No chest beating, no sermon. A fact more solid than a fence post by sunup. The boy slurps broth and begs for a biscuit, and the cookhouse shifts another inch toward being the center of the spread, rather than a room tacked on the side. Then the basin tightens. Drought cracks into the grass. The wash shows bone. The herd loses shine, a few yearlings. Cough foamy spittle by the trough. A merchant with rail polish on his boots rides in waving terms that read like rope thin at one end, and thick at the other. Our company can guarantee provision if we keep your books, he says. Gaze sliding toward the kitchen door. Gideon lets the pitch fall to dust, replies without heat supplies arrive when coin hits palm. Not before the man tries a smile that never reaches eyes. Says the territory now expects regularity. A deputy can be along with notices. The rancher's jaw barely shifts. The conversation ends in the yard with no hands laid, no weapons raised, only a closed gate that remembers the click of a latch. The visitor leaves with straight shoulders, but dust on perfect cuffs. That same evening Mara finds 3 ulcers under a steer's lip, knows the plant that did it, the look-alike that pretends to be. Feed replies with a paste of boiled bark ash and bitter leaf. Forces the mixture between molars, while Gideon braces the head horses, flick flies somewhere. A meadowlark makes argument with its own echo. The pen smells of fear and smoke and life by week's end. The count holds steady losses. Small compared with neighbors. The ledger marks it without flourish. Beans, flour, salt, lard, paste, delivered to 37 head. Every number neat like tracks in wet sand. A ranch survives long stretches by the width of a biscuit and a clean mark on paper. The men in fine vests return not to buy, not to ask, but to look. They watch the rows near the pens, the trimmed lamp glass. The children carrying kindling with a soldier's focus. Their eyes rest on Mara too long, then pull away, one says as if to the air. A woman like that belongs in town behind a polished bar, pouring comfort for coin. The line crawls across Gideon's nerves, but he answers with 6 plain words. The cook belongs where the stove stands. The visitor smiles. Too Smooth rides off saying, schedules matter, ownership matters. The word schedules hangs like a gnat. It returns 2 days later, nailed to the gate by a deputy, new to the county. A notice of attachment for alleged arrears due to the spur company, accompanied by a rumor carried on purpose that children on this spread may be better served in town care. That rumor hits the yard like a thrown stone. Nothing breaks, but rings go out in wide circles. Gideon studies the paper. Once then. Twice the deputy sweats under a clean hat. The widow steps into bright light, stands square, without heat, sir. The county keeps ledgers, Gideon says. So do we. The book opens on the table figures. Crisp dates and names added nightly, witnessed by 4 men who nod now. From the shade the deputy reads and rereads, and the noon sun lifts higher, as if to make sure everything lies visible. The crowd of hands grows, but stays quiet. Holsters, closed palms, open near the buckles. The smallest child, May, leans her cheek to the cookhouse doorframe, bored by adult noise. A moment later, water rights, not words, force the issue. A shout rises from the wind pump. A thin rope on the counterweight snapped. A stranger's pocket knife lies open in the dust where no one owns such a blade. The trough drains while the herd noses dry wood. The crisis swings the yard into motion like a gate on good hinges. Gideon moves for the pump. Hugh brings a spare rope. Without being told, Elsie steadies the ladder. Mara calls for buckets. Hands line up shoulder to shoulder, a living chain from barrel to pump house. The deputy stares a second at the knife, then pockets it on reflex and joins the line. Because a mouth gone dry does not care about paperwork. Water lifts, shines, falls into the trough. A horse nickers. Relief cattle push forward, but not in a crush. The line keeps pouring. The counterweight lifts. The pump finds rhythm again. Wood shrieks, then settles into an honest clack-clack that can play all afternoon. The paper, the rumor. The vestmen evaporate in the face of that sound. Nothing theatrical happens, only proof in daylight. The deputy clears his throat, says this ledger looks in order. Your water looks clean. I will write town that the matter stays closed. The rancher tips a hat without smile. The widow hands the lawman a dipper. He drinks, says, ma'am. Sorry to trouble your day rides off small on the road. The only witness that remains is the green thread by the pens fluttering in a thin wind. The season refuses to break. Heat holds like glass. Then a different risk decides to test the yard. A thunderhead piles up on the far mesa, dark as iron, yet no rain slides off it. Lightning walks a distant ridge, strikes dry brush. Smoke lifts low. Lazy wind veers wrong, a ribbon of fire creeps downhill toward winter grass. Stubble, no stampede of flame, just a tongue that wants a meal. Men reach for rifles, then for shovels, finally for scents. Mara's voice slices the hum, low, clear, wet the edge now. Not later canvas sacks hit the trough dip. Lift slap against ground hands string along a ragged line from cookhouse to fence. The widow leads a pace that an old mare could keep. Gideon runs a set of back cuts with a mattock at the edge of the yard, cutting to mineral soil. The fire reaches the first break, finds nothing to eat. Turns on itself, sulks, gives a few dirty breaths and dies. Smoke drifts over the herb rows without cooking them. The sky goes bruised, then bright. The crisis passes like a rough cough. The yard takes one breath together, then another. Gideon looks at the widow who still holds a wet sack dripping at her boots. Nobody cheers. The crew just resets the buckets, hangs the bags to dry, wipes faces, finds biscuits left from noon, and eats in silence like men who chose to keep a home standing in daylight without making a sermon from it. After fire comes wind that wants to scatter what remains. So the ranch answers with weight rails tightened, nails reset a bread oven of brick, rises against the kitchen wall. Gideon lays the courses himself one evening while the sun smears honey on the boards, his sleeves rolled, forearms nicked by mortar. The eldest girl hands him the next brick like a surgeon's tool. The boy keeps sand damp with a dipper. The smallest naps under a shade cloak. The widow tests the door of the oven with one fingertip, finds the heat true, not scorching, just deep. She slides in a round of dough patted flat like a map. The smell climbs into the yard. Men stop at the threshold like churchgoers caught smiling too wide. One ranch can pull a country road's worth of travelers when bread talks that way. Then the outer turn arrives public as a fair, with none of the ribbons. The spur company stages a meeting in town to discuss a new scale tax meant to pin small outfits, perhaps not in words, but in angle. The veil spread cannot skip this fight. Gideon rides in at noon, hat brim lifted, clean shirt buttoned, vest brushed, holster closed. He carries a copy of the Ledger bound in canvas because numbers speak fluent politics. Mara comes too by her own decision wagon bench steady beneath her children wedged on the seat between them like little sacks of meal. The street glows white. The hall hotter than outside townsfolk, fan faces with broadsides. The speaker in a neat coat reads terms that fold on themselves like a snake eating its tail when questions begin. The flavor turns rough. A banker claims volatility among independent spreads, proof being rumors of poorhouse children at the Vale place. The lie tastes stale even as it leaves his mouth, murmurs. Run then stop because a voice from the doorway slices through skinny as a saw blade column. The hand stands backlit by sun, says, "The cookhouse runs cleaner than your office, Bob." The laughter that follows breaks the spell, but not the tension. Gideon keeps quiet until the room tires of itself, then lays the ledger flat on the table, pages open to grain coffee stains and neat counts. Beans, flour, salt, wages paid down to the dime. He speaks almost idly like a man describing fence line rather than making claim. This book stays open every night. Anyone who eats here can read it. I asked the town to keep books as clean as this one. No swagger, no threat, only the sound of daylight touching paper. The coatman coughs, changes subject. The scale tax loses breath before a vote even forms. Townspeople drift outside, blinking into the sun. Conversation turns to weather, to births, to a buckboard that lost a wheel out past the wash. Nobody writes a resolution, but the current moves clear enough. The company men leave with nothing but their hats. A few ride hard and do not look back. The deputy tips 2 fingers to Mara on the boardwalk. The widow nods. The children lick molasses from biscuits bought for a penny each at the mercantile. The picture stands plain, public yet soft. No guns raised, no headlines, just a count of things done. Honest. Rain finally arrives like coin poured out slow. Not dramatic, just steady with a smell like pennies and crushed sage drops. Spot the yard dark, then darker dust turns to paste. Cattle noses shine again. A new run of grass needles through the dead thatch. The trough overflows. Tiny rivers find old ruts and remember where to go. The herb strip triples in size without asking permission. Gideon nails a plank above the cookhouse door, hand letters burnt with a branding iron veil. Spread cookroom ledger kept nightly. Those 4 words become a contract not on paper but in bones. The widow traces the heat marks with a fingertip. Not a ring, Not a ribbon, but an oath fit for this country. The rancher sets a second stool at the table, not for a guest, for the owner of the stove. The boy Hugh gets a little hammer of his own. The eldest Elsie holds keys to the pantry. The smallest May names each plant in the row. Some private language only 6 years old folks could invent music returns by natural drift. Not as a performance, just as notes shaped after supper on a porch guitar that had gone quiet for years. Strings tuned enough to carry a simple line. Dust hangs in that light, like gold leaf, thin and floating, not showy. A cowbell clinks once in the far pen, then rests. The hands sit on the steps longer than usual because no one wants to lose the sound. Closing comes at high noon on a day washed clean by yesterday's rain. The whole place smells new saddle leather, fresh-cut pine steam from bread pulled from the oven. A herd moves slow past the wind pump toward shade. The long table under the lean-to wears its best workday. Faced tin mugs, upright plates warm a skillet at the center, holding crusted ends that might start a fight if there were not enough for everyone. Gideon brings the ledger, not to guard it, to share it. Mara slides in beside him. Not behind him, the children argue about whether mint belongs in tea or only as garnish. The hands take their places without banging benches. The old guitar leans by the door, with 2 strings replaced. A breeze slips under the brim of every hat and lifts hair at the nape. In that plain, bright frame, Gideon speaks a single line made of oak rather than lace. This house stands because a widow walked in at noon with a skillet and a steady back. The reply is not, "Cheers," it is quieter than that. Dishes set down softly, a few men clear throats. The widow watches, the yard eyes bright without spill. Her palm finds the table wood instead of his sleeve, but the contact says enough. The ranch exhales as one thing. Rather than many things, the camera of the mind steps back just far enough to take in the herb rows, the pump, the oven, the trough. Sunlight flowing over iron and wood like water over rock. The story lands there with breath still moving through it. Not a finish line, only a gate left open to evening chores and the next morning's coffee boil. 5 small seeds changed a hard place before a storm did it. Soil, water, order, patience, and a hand steady at heat. Sometimes love shows up wearing an apron instead of a ribbon. Sometimes the strongest promise on the frontier is a ledger kept nightly and a porch where music returns without being pushed. I think of Gideon's quiet and Mara's braid and the way small boots learn a house by sound, not by map. We tell these lives in daylight so older eyes can rest on them and believe in morning again. If this tale carried you for a while, subscribe and ring the bell, so the next light finds you right on time with us at the table.